Okay, great. So yeah, hello again from me. My name's Sanghadharin, and hello to those of you that are joining us online. So yeah, I need to apologise to start off with, because on YouTube this was billed as a talk on morality, but actually it's a talk on patience. So for those of you that came yearning for a talk on morality, I'm very sorry. I was having visions of everyone storming out chanting, "We want morality." But so yeah, you're all still here, so that's good. So yeah, we've been looking at, we've been doing a series. We had the first week last week. We're doing a series on what's called the Paramitas. And Paramitas means perfections. So this is the Buddhist list of perfections. There's 6 perfections, and these are the perfections of the Bodhisattva. So this is a Buddhist word that you might have come across, you might not have. But Bodhisattva means someone who has their heart set on enlightenment. So someone that's got their heart set on enlightenment, but they're not just set on enlightenment for their own sake. They're set on enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So there's someone that's practicing wholeheartedly, they're practicing the Buddha's teachings wholeheartedly to gain enlightenment, but not just for themselves, it's to gain enlightenment for everyone, to help other people gain enlightenment as well. So it's basically someone where the altruistic dimension of practice has emerged. Their practice has moved beyond just doing it for themselves to doing it for other people, and the altruistic dimensions emerged in their life. And yeah, the Paramitas are a way that a Bodhisattva, so someone that's got their heart set on enlightenment, it's a way that they would spontaneously act. So for the Bodhisattva, they wouldn't need to try to act in these ways. They wouldn't need to try to act out the perfections. It's just how they'd naturally do it. And yeah, so their heart's set on helping others, and all of their actions would naturally emerge from this place, basically, because that's what their heart's doing, so that's what they'll naturally do. But as far as I can assume, none of us are bodhisattvas yet. We may be practicing, we might practice for some time, but we're probably not bodhisattvas, so this won't be the way that we're practicing. This won't be the way that we're acting all the time. So as unenlightened beings, our actions will be at least partly selfishly motivated a lot of the time. So these paramitas, they're when all selfish motivation's been relinquished and it's just fully doing it for everyone else. But we will have selfish motivations, at least partly, most of the time. So for us, the paramitas are a path. They're a way that we can practice, a way that we can act to try to move towards the mind of a bodhisattva. So if we consciously make effort to practice these, if we consciously try to develop these perfections, they'll become our natural way of being, and then eventually we would become a bodhisattva. So yeah, that's just a bit about the paramitas before I go in. We're just going to look at one of them tonight. But there are 6. There are 6 paramitas. So I'll read them out, and they come in 3 pairs. So there's dana and sila, which is generosity and ethics. Kshanti and virya, which is patience and energy in pursuit of the good. And then samadhi and prajna, which are meditation and wisdom. So yeah, so there's generosity, ethics, patience, energy in pursuit of the good, meditation and wisdom. So last week we looked at dana and sila, which is generosity and ethics. So if you're interested in that, you could go onto YouTube, and there's a whole talk on those 2. Akash Mitra did this lovely section where he was basically comparing the spiritual life with a big tasty dessert. So that might be interesting for you to go and watch. But there's a really good talk kind of explaining the foundations of these paramitas. But you don't need to have been here last week to understand what I'm going to talk about today. Yeah, so tonight we'll be looking at Kshanti, which is translated as patience. I was talking to Tanvi earlier, and I told her, she was like, what's the talk going to be on? And I said, it's going to be on patience. And she was like, yay! Which I have to be honest, whenever I hear patience, that's not necessarily my response. It's kind of like, no, like energy in pursuit of the good, yeah. Patience is a bit like, oh, yawn. But it's hard to translate what Kshanti is in one word, but it's a very beautiful word. It's a very beautiful quality, and yeah, it's said to be one of the most beautiful words in Buddhism. And we can't necessarily say exactly what it is, but hopefully throughout the talk, I'll be talking in lots of different ways that will evoke something of what Kshanti is. But there are a few things through different aspects of Kshanti, a few different aspects of patience. So there's patience with ourselves, patience with other people, patience when things don't go our own way. There's a tolerance for people to have their own ideas, beliefs, even prejudices, love and kindliness, openness, willingness to take things in, receptivity to others, and receptivity to higher truths, and higher spiritual truths especially. So there's all of these different aspects to Kshanti. So it doesn't mean just patience in the way that we understand it. There's all of these different aspects of it from a Buddhist perspective. And so Kshanti is a form of love, basically. It's a form of metta, it's a form of compassion. And it's basically love or metta when it comes into contact with difficult circumstances. So you have this in Buddhism, where metta is one of the most fundamental Buddhist qualities, but when it comes into interaction with different things, then different qualities emerge. So for example, when metta comes into contact with suffering, then compassion can emerge. Or when metta comes into contact with someone who's happy, sympathetic joy emerges. But then with Kshanti, it's metta when it comes under difficult circumstances. So when we experience difficult circumstances, metta turns into Kshanti. So we could say it's love where there's no reason to love, basically. And when things are hard, when people are hard, then we have to practice Kshanti. So it's kind of an antidote to anger and hatred. Often when we encounter difficulty, anger will arise, hatred will arise, and it's an antidote to those things. So we look at start by looking at impatience. So this isn't a Buddhist perspective. This is just our way that we talk about impatience. So it's not accepting delay. It's not accepting opposition. So if people say something that we don't agree with, or pain, physical or emotional pain, if we don't encounter them with calm, if we don't encounter them with a calm and serene mind, then there's some amount of impatience. And it could also be a restless desire or expectation for something. So kind of if we're being impatient for something, we want it, we're feeling restless about getting it. So basically what happens is we experience something and then it gives rise to an unpleasant feeling. There's like an unpleasant sensation. And then what we try and do, we try and get out of that. We interpret that as something's wrong, and then we try and get out of that. So we'll do something to try and get out of it, or we'll try and put things in place to get rid of that pain. So we basically attach to a state of not being in that pain. We have this difficulty, we have this unpleasant feeling. We attach to not having this feeling, and then we basically end up straining against reality to not feel it. So just a kind of mundane example of this. Say you're like in a queue for a bakery, and there's a long line, and you're hungry, so you're in that queue. You then see, you're probably hungry, so there's already a bit of discomfort, and then maybe you want like a croissant, but you see there's one left, and there's all of these people in the way, and then when you see that, there's then fear. Fear arises that, oh no, someone else is going to get that before. So already there's more unpleasant sensations going on. There's more unpleasant mental and probably physical feelings as well. So you're already feeling impatient. It's like, no, I need to get to the queue, so I get the front of the queue so I can get that. And then as you're going forward, you're getting more and more restless, more and more anxious. And then if someone then takes it, you then have even more unpleasant sensations. And you can see how that anticipation is what causes the suffering. But that's just one example, but we'll look at lots of different examples throughout the talk. But it's also, so Kshanti is an enlightened quality, basically. It's a quality of the enlightened mind. And I was trying to think about how to articulate it, but I think it's probably easiest to look at it with an image, to have an image to evoke what Kshanti is as an enlightened quality. And this is a traditional image. So basically you have a vast ocean You have this vast ocean, and then when a stone is dropped into the ocean is completely unperturbed. It's completely undisturbed by this rock falling into the ocean. So yeah, in this image, the ocean is the Buddha's mind. So it's a mind of infinite breadth and infinite depth. And the stone dropping in is basically hardship or difficulty. So this stone of hardship or difficulty drops into the Buddha's mind, the Buddha's experience, and is completely unperturbed. So his calm, or not that's talking about the Buddha, but any enlightened mind, they wouldn't be disturbed by calm. Their calm wouldn't be disturbed, their equanimity, their love, their compassion would be completely undisturbed by these difficulties. And in a way, a Buddha wouldn't be patient in a way. It's just that's what it would look like from our end. They would just be completely undisturbed by any hardship. But from our end, it will look like patience. It will look like extreme patience. So that's a traditional image for Kshanti. Now I've come up with a slightly less traditional image for what our minds are like. So we're unenlightened beings. So you could imagine our mind being like a small cup. So the Buddha's mind's this ocean, and we're like a small cup that's full to the top. So yeah, comparably less breadth and less depth, but with a small cup of water. And then when a stone is dropped into it, because it's full to the brim, like water splashes everywhere, it overflows, and the rock then basically takes up all of the cup. So when we experience difficulty, have this really strong effect on us. We'll lose our awareness, we'll lose our mindfulness, we'll just feel this difficulty really strongly, and then the hardship, the pain, often takes up most of our awareness. So in the same way that the rock fills up most of the glass and it's lost a lot of the water, when we experience difficulty, it's kind of that becomes the focus of our attention. That's kind of all we can see. So yeah, when we experience it, it's just that's the focus of our attention, of our mind. So yeah, they're just two images to see like the contrast between what an enlightened mind would be like and what an unenlightened mind is like. So yeah, we're going to start off with looking at different aspects of patience now. And the first one we're going to look at is patience with ourselves. So we just did a practice of the Metta Bhavana. And in the Metta Bhavana, we start with ourselves. And that's because unless we can have some amount of metta or goodwill for ourselves, it'll be very hard to cultivate it fully for other beings. And it's the same with patience. If we don't have patience for ourselves, it'll be very hard to cultivate patience for others. So yeah, what we're going to look at is patience with ourselves. But I'd like just to start off with, if you turn to the person next to you and just talk about, what do you think patience with ourselves looks like? What would it look like to be patient with ourselves? Yeah, just talk to the person next to you, find someone. You could go into three if you need to. So I forgot to say, those of you online, if you have anything you want to say, do put it in the chat, and then Faraz is on the tech and he can say for you. So would anyone be happy to share what you were talking about? What does patience with ourselves, what might patience with ourselves look like?
Having realistic expectations of yourself.
Can you say more?
Setting yourself too higher goals, and then when you don't meet those, chastising yourself for them.
Yeah, really good.
And then a cycle of that.
Yeah.
Not meeting the goals that you set, so then you get angry and you get upset with yourself. So patience would be to either accept those limitations or to lower expectations.
Yeah, so be realistic with where we're at, and then realistic with our expectations, and not worry too much if we don't
because the suffering comes from not being in the place that we think we should be. And not being happy with the place that we are. Yeah, it's that expectation of what should be that's causing the suffering. Yeah, really good. Yeah, Mike.
Like coming on from that, just not really setting goals in a way, because when you just get obsessed with where you are and what, then that's all you think about. I think it's, if you're passionate about something you do, you're going to put time into it without having to think about where you've been and where you're going. So in that sense, then you're not going to be worrying about patience, in yourself as in terms of growth.
Yeah, so kind of enjoying what you're doing and enjoying the process rather than where you're trying to get to.
If you're working a terrible job, it doesn't matter. If you're not thinking about the job as such and just doing it, you're so much happier.
Yeah, and that would be a form of patience, wouldn't it? If you're doing a job that you're finding hard, but you're just getting on with it without getting into some story about it.
It's a different mindset.
Yeah, great.
It could probably apply to different situations. About, say, if I'm doing something and someone else is waiting for me, like I often get an image in my head that they're like annoyed with me, and hurry up. So then I'll instead of just doing it at the pace in which I can do it, I prioritize pleasing them in my head, get all rushy and stuff. But being patient would probably be to just acknowledge that image is there, but also just put myself first and just do it at the pace in which I can do it.
Yeah. And then what emotion arises with that image? So you're saying there's the image, what emotion then arises with that?
Fear and self-hatred. Just that kind of...
Yeah, and then
myself.
But then being patient with the fact that those emotions have arisen as well. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so there's quite a few interesting things of expectation there. That's definitely kind of the area of it where we're wanting something that isn't happening, and then we're grasping towards it or scared of it as well. But there's a few different areas that we'll go through. So the first one, thanks for everyone that spoke there. So the first one we're going to look at is patience with our bodies. So we'll need to be patient with our bodies throughout our life. We're not going to do anything without this body. And it comes with all sorts of limitations. So we're born with a human body, and that will come with lots of opportunities, but also lots of limitations. So we'll have lots of aches, and we'll have lots of pains, and we'll have lots of illnesses. And it's easy when these have happened to really resist these or think that something's gone wrong. And then every time I get a cold, I just go into this state of oh, this is the end of the world. When really it's happened so many times. It happens for everyone. And really, if we resist it, it just causes us so much extra suffering. This is just what our body's like. Bodies do get ill, and that is we just need to bear that, and we need to be patient with that. And there's much talk in Buddhism of the preciousness of a human body. it's through a human body that we can strive towards enlightenment. Buddhism teaches that it's only the human form that can gain enlightenment. And it's a support for practicing the spiritual life and developing our mind and developing our consciousness. It's through a human body that we are able to do that. And it's important to look after the body as well as much as we can. So to like eat healthily, exercise, not do things that unnecessarily harm the body. But as much as we try and look after the body, as much as we do, it is going to let us down. It will end up eventually letting us down, decaying, and eventually dying. That's a fact of having a body. It's something that comes with having a body. We have all of these opportunities. From a Buddhist perspective, we have the opportunity to gain enlightenment, but we also, that comes with the fact that the body will decay, it will cause us pain, and it will eventually die. And we need to do our best to just face the facts of old age, sickness and death. That's one of the things that set the Buddha out on the path of trying to gain enlightenment, was seeing, actually, always, whatever I do in my life, I'm going to get old, I'm going to get sick, and I'm going to die. And if we resist these, we just cause ourselves unnecessary suffering. So we need to do our best to look after them. We need to do our best to do as much as we can with our bodies while we have them. But accept that it just isn't ever fully under our control. Like, no matter how healthy we eat, no matter how many multivitamins we take, no matter how many like body hacks we do, ultimately it is out of our control. And so we need to do our best to just try and accept old age and sickness gracefully. And I was trying to think of like some anecdotes, but like I don't actually have that many of me growing old yet. If I do this talk in 10 years, I'm sure I'll have a lot more to give. But there was one time where I was living upstairs, and they have this horrible light above the mirror, which like shines down on you. And every time I was in that bathroom, I was like, oh my God, I'm balding, my hair's thinning so much, you like see through. And it's like, it caused me so much anxiety. It was just like, I was like, kind of like all of these stories, like, no, it's just the light, it's just the light. It's like, isn't to anyone else. And I ended up kind of like, I went through old pictures to like compare my hair now with what my hair was like 5 years ago. And it's like, does it look thinner now or does it not? It just caused me so much anxiety. And then eventually it was kind of like, I did end up just starting to reflect, like, oh no, this is actually what's going to happen. It doesn't really matter if it's happening now or not. This is just what's going to happen. And our bodies are going to get old. They are going to not do the things we used to be able to do. And eventually they are going to let us down and die. And the more we can face that with grace and with dignity, the more happy our life will be, and the more dignified the end of our life will be. Yeah, it's important to be as prepared for old age as we can, as much as death, really. So Sanghadharin, who founded this movement, he said he'd reflected on death a lot in his life. So he felt like when death came, he was really well prepared for death. But actually, he was not prepared for old age. He hadn't reflected on old age in the same way. So that when actually his body started letting down, his eyesight went, he was basically blind in the last years of his life, so he needed a lot of support, and he wasn't ready for that lack of independence. So it's important to acknowledge the fact we will grow old as well. And actually, I was thinking, if you want a masterclass in facing sickness and death, I really recommend reading Deva Mitra's book, Entertaining Cancer. So he's one of the teachers here at the Buddhist Center. He's been ordained for 50 years, and he faced cancer. Well, he's still facing cancer now, but in the first time that he was facing cancer, he wrote a book about his experience as it was going on. And it's an amazing account of like someone that's really thoroughly Buddhist, has a really wise perspective on life, and what happens when that mind encounters going through cancer and going through cancer treatment. And for me, it was just such an eye-opening and inspiring book to read. So yeah, if you wanted a way to reflect on old age and sickness, but in a Buddhist and inspiring way, I really recommend that book. It's called Entertaining Cancer. Yes, the next thing I want to talk about is patience with what you might call our psychological shape. So we all have kind of like a shape to our mind, our kind of like psychological shape. And this will be due to our genes, but also due to our conditioning, like early life conditioning, but also conditioning throughout our lives. And we need to do our best to just be patient with our psychological shape, and in a way not just wish that we were different. Like, there are things we can do, we can work on our minds, but just wishing we were different isn't going to do anything. So we'll all have strengths with our shape as well, so it's not all bad. So some people will be more organized than others, some will be more like academically intelligent, but then some will be more emotionally intelligent. Some will kind of be more charismatic, but some will be more empathic. People will excel in certain things, and some people will kind of... It was interesting. Someone said to Sanghadharin, like, "Oh, I don't feel like I can do anything. Like, there's all of these people that have things they're really good at. I don't feel like I can do anything." And he said, "Well, why don't you just think of yourself as an unspecialized human being?" Which he wasn't saying in any like derogatory way at all. It's like, you don't have to be like some specialized human being. Like, you can just be a person that's just around and is just nice to be around, and like that's perfectly fine. Like, there's nothing to say you have to be amazing at things. So yeah, it's kind of, I like this idea of this unspecialized human being. But also everyone will have their weak spots as well. We'll all have aspects of our mind that we find difficult. So some people will be more prone to anger, some will be more prone to anxiety, some will be more prone to laziness, some will be more prone to pushing themselves too hard and then getting really tired and frustrated. And kind of we'll all have these aspects of ourselves, this kind of like psychological shape. And the more we can understand it, we'll be able to work with it and bear the challenges and be patient with the challenges that our mind gives us. But also we need to balance this with not fixing ourselves as well. Not fixing as in fixing something, but fixing something. I can't think of the two. Not something's broken and we fix it, but fix it as in saying this can't change. So we don't want to fix ourselves to say that we can't change. So for example, some people will just naturally be more introverted and some people will naturally be more extroverted. And that just seems to be in the makeup of people. They have these two tendencies. And we don't want to beat ourselves up for being that way, but we also don't want to limit ourselves. So for example, we'll all be able to improve being around people, being kind, being generous, being able to talk to different people. So we'll all be able to improve that, whether we're introverted or extroverted. That's something we'll all be able to improve on. But also we'll all be able to improve our capacity to spend satisfying time by ourselves. So whether we're introverted or extroverted, we'll all be able to find more and more ways of being okay being by ourselves and finding that satisfying and fulfilling. So we don't want to limit ourselves. So we might be a certain way, but we don't want to limit ourselves. And we also don't want to fool ourselves into thinking something's just our shape, when it's actually something we probably just need to work on. So just being like, oh, I'm just an angry shape. Or it's like, or I'm just like, yeah, I'm just a messy type. So it's kind of like, my house is a tip. It's like, yeah, that's just my shape. It's like, no, that's me, basically. It's like, no, actually, you just need to get better at tidying up. But yeah, I've got a mind that tends really strongly towards anxiety. And even when there doesn't seem to be a cause, there just seems to be anxiety there a lot of the time. And yeah, through meditating, I can see this has massively changed. Like 3 years of meditating, that's really changed. But it's definitely still there. I can see that's in my shape, like I'm just an anxious shape. And I know that there's like positives that come with my mind as well, but that's definitely one of the things I find difficult. And I can either get frustrated by it and just be like, oh, there I am again being anxious, or I can be kind to it and I can be patient with it. And it's kind of like, by being patient with it, it just causes way less suffering, and I can just enjoy my life way more without trying to just push away this part of my experience that is just going to be there for probably quite a long time, like maybe forever. But the more we can get to know ourselves, the more we can accept how we are, but also don't fix ourselves and try and make sure that we are always trying to grow and trying to change, so we can be patient with our psychological shape in that way. Yeah, and we also need to be patient with our emotions. So it's important to be patient with ourselves when we're experiencing difficult emotions. So when we feel hurt, when we feel upset, when we feel grief, when we're angered by something, it's kind of we just need to be patient with that, because emotions move through in their own time. So if we're feeling any of these things, if we're feeling grief, we can't try and rush not feeling it anymore. It is just going to be there. And the more we can just allow it and be patient with it, those emotions will move through us. Because we can't will them to speed up. We can't force them to move through quickly. They kind of have a life of their own. They just need to be felt, and they need to be lived through in a certain way. And this also includes internal emotional conflicts. So we'll all have emotional conflicts from time to time. It's basically where different parts of ourselves will want different things, and it'll feel like they're in conflict with each other. And it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to sit with these emotional conflicts. Kind of when we have these emotional conflicts, you'll often find your rational mind will go into like overdrive trying to figure it out, but actually it kind of doesn't do anything. It's like the mind will be going it over and over again, but it just can't come to any resolution. And that's normally because there's some emotional conflict going on, which will just be untouched by that rational thought. And often what we need to do with that is to just sit with it. We just need to sit with that conflict, sit with it and be patient. And eventually we'll just find one day there will be some resolution, and we'll have made our mind up, which will have had nothing to do with our rational mind trying to get to the bottom of it. So I had this experience quite strongly where I was on a long retreat a few years ago, and I'd left. Well, I was running a business at the time, and I'd gone on this long retreat. I'd kind of taken a bit of a break to go on this long retreat. And while I was there, I was just in this such an emotional conflict about whether to leave my business or not. And it felt like every day there was just this war going on between different parts of myself, like should I or shouldn't I? And my mind was just going round and round, kind of thinking it through, but nothing was actually it wasn't coming to any conclusion. So it was just it was emotionally conflicted. There was just these emotions that were, one part of me thought I should do this, one part thought I should do this. But then one day it just felt like the conflict had just resolved. And it wasn't like I'd thought anything different. It was just one day emotionally there'd been some sort of resolution that then it was really clear to me to what I had to do. But I wasn't able to rush that process. I literally just had to sit with it. I just had to sit with the emotional conflict, and eventually it then resolved. So so when we have these emotional conflicts, we just need to bring patience with it. We just need to bring kindness and just let it live its length that it needs to then come to a resolution. Yeah, and my final section for patience with ourselves is patience with our spiritual growth. So spiritual growth depends basically on setting up the right conditions. So that's what spiritual growth is really dependent on. It's not about willpower. It's easy to try and force ourselves into higher states of consciousness, especially like in meditating. You can kind of just try and I'm going to get more concentrated and try and use that willpower to try and change our mind. But really, we just need to put in the conditions and then trust that those higher states of consciousness will eventually emerge. So like if we act ethically, if we meditate regularly, if we listen to the Dharma, if we study, if we develop friendships with other people that are also practicing, we can just trust that those conditions will lead to spiritual growth. We don't need to try and force more. We can just trust that if we put in the right conditions, spiritual growth will happen, and we will start to grow in the way that we want to. Because if we don't trust the conditions, if we don't trust that a meditation practice does work, then we won't be able to fully commit to it. So we need to trust that meditation, that will actually do something. And that might take a little while of testing it out, seeing if there's been a change. And then the more we do it, the more we do trust it. But if we keep doubting our conditions, it's just not going to be helpful, basically. An image for it is kind of like if you're trying to grow a plant, but you keep on pulling it out to check the roots to see if it's growing, and then you put it back in, and then the next day pull it out again. That's not going to be conducive to the plant actually growing. And that's the same with if we're constantly questioning our conditions, if we're questioning our meditation practice, if we're questioning that is this actually going to work, then it's not it's not fully committing to it so that it does. And that's not to say that we can't have questions, but it's just if we're emotionally doubting what we're doing all the time, we're never going to be able to fully do it, and then we won't actually see whether it works. And yeah, so we do need patience as well with spiritual progress, because it requires a deep change. It requires a deep change to our mind. So some Buddhist schools talk about a turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness, which I really like as an image. So it's kind of the deepest seat of consciousness, there's a turning about. And that's what we're trying to do with our spiritual practice. So what we're working on is very deep, and getting impatient with it won't help. It won't speed it up. We kind of just need to keep going, trusting that we are working at a very deep level and change will happen if we can be patient with it. And yeah, so that involves being patient with our habits. We need to be patient with changing our habits. So habits go really deep, and it does take time to transform them. And there's quite often like this uncomfortable phase where you've spotted a habit. You're like, oh, I do that, and it really doesn't help me, but you can't change it. So you've kind of like seen that you're doing it. You're aware that you're doing it, but it keeps happening. And there's this really uncomfortable phase of like, oh, I'm just seeing I'm doing that again. Oh, that's horrible. Oh, why am I doing that to myself? But actually, it just takes, eventually, if you keep on being aware of something, there'll become a time where the penny does just eventually drop. And it's like, oh, I've actually stopped doing that now, or at least it's significantly changed. But it does just take quite a while for that penny to drop. So yeah, don't be disheartened if you've noticed something and it hasn't just changed like that. It's like when we bring awareness to something, it still takes quite a while for that awareness and that knowledge to seep to a deeper level, and then for change to actually happen. So we need to be patient with our habits while all of us catches up with our awareness. And then yeah, being patient with meditation. So meditation does work, it does transform the mind, but it also won't happen overnight. Like we might notice a change, we might feel calmer, we might feel a bit more clear straight after a meditation, but it will take a while until we see like a profound change in ourselves. But it really will work, and we can trust that over time meditation does lead to change. I had quite an important shift when I was meditating, where I basically stopped worrying about individual meditations. I stopped worrying about how individual meditations went, and I just decided, actually, I just want a life of meditation. I want my life to go in the direction that my life will go in when I'm meditating every day. I want to have the life of someone that meditates every day and what that has. And in terms of like broadening the scope of my meditation practice out to that time scale, it really made me stop worrying so much about the day-to-day of where I'm at. Like I kept meditating every day, but I stopped worrying about the day-to-day, but just trusting that if I keep meditating, my life will keep on going in the direction that I want it to go in. Yes, that's the end of patience with ourselves. So we're going to look at patience with other people now. So at the time of the Buddha, there were lots of what are called ascetic practices. And the idea with these practices was if you mortified the flesh, it would free the mind. Now we don't teach these practices here, but the idea was that if you mortified your flesh, your mind would be free. So there's different practices. So some were not eating for weeks on end. So that was one, you'd like starve yourself. Another one was you'd stand on one leg for ages, and somehow that would help. And the other one was you'd sit in the middle surrounded by fires, just in this like extreme heat surrounded by fires. And these were meant to free your mind. Now the Buddha actually tried these before he was enlightened, but he decided they didn't work. So yeah, it's good news for us. But yeah, these were so popular at the time of the Buddha that some of his disciples went to him and they said, we want some of them. Like, we like those ascetic practices. Can you give us some of those ascetic practices? And the Buddha said that Kshanti is the greatest asceticism. So it's like you don't need all of these practices to put you in loads of suffering. Like life will give you enough suffering as it is. Like, you don't need to add more. What you need to do is be patient. So you need to develop Kshanti. So that's the greatest asceticism. So yeah, and one of the main areas where we'll need to be patient is with other people. So other people will give us lots of chances to practice patience. But it's also good to remember that we'll give other people a lot of chance to practice patience as well. So we can be a pain too. But yeah, if you want to talk to the person next to you, what do you think being patient towards other people looks like? Yeah, what does patience towards other people look like? So what do we think patience with other people will look like?
I think it could be something about acceptance that they're also just human, so they'll inevitably have flaws and make mistakes and do things that will negatively impact you from time to time. So something about being able to sit with that and accept that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, for those of you online, so it's saying accepting that other people are human as well, and they'll have their flaws and they will mess up from time to time, and yeah, just need to be patient with that. So yeah, that might be a really good thing to bring to mind if we're needing to cultivate patience towards people. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Also, accepting difference. And I think a lot of times we connect with other people by saying, oh, we have the same kind of fears or struggles, but also in certain situations, someone is just going to act differently and feel differently, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, so being patient with people who are different to us and maybe we don't understand. Yeah, and just acknowledge, actually, I just don't understand that, but that's okay. Yeah. One more?
Travelling around London.
Say more?
I'm just constantly frustrated on the underground.
Right.
Or on the bus.
Yeah. And why do you think you're frustrated?
People are loud, people are in my face. There's lots of people.
Yeah, so being patient with other people when they're doing things that you find difficult. Yeah, great. Yeah, so when we talk about patience with other people, it's easy to imagine just kind of like gritting our teeth and just kind of like getting through it. But the idea with patience isn't that we just endure it and then go away thinking like, oh God, that was hard. That's not like the patience that we're aspiring to. So it is about feeling love. It's about feeling metta for people who, for who people actually are. rather than who we'd like them to be. And that kind of links to our expectations thing that we were talking about earlier. So it's not who we'd like them to be, but actually feeling love for who they are. When we first meet people, we quite often think, oh, I like this person. But then when we get to know them more, we then start to get to encounter bits of them that maybe we don't like so much. And that's another chance where it's like, oh, it is going to require patience. And to be able to feel love for all aspects of someone is real love and real patience, even if there's parts we find difficult. Yeah. So one of the aspects is tolerance, and I think tolerance is kind of needing to show patience for people that have different views to us. And again, I think the word tolerance isn't that great because it kind of has the implication of like, oh, I'll tolerate it, but I'm not going to like it. Whereas really, like, tolerance here, it doesn't mean we have to like things, but there's still love involved. It's a tolerance where there's love, even if there's disagreement. So we need to be able to show patience with people when they hold different views, and they might even be views that we find horrible. They might be views that we find abhorrent, just kind of like, oh, I can't believe anyone could possibly think that. But we're going to need to show patience, and it's so easy to polarize and dehumanize people when we disagree with them. It's one of the ways that we can most easily like write people off because they think something that we don't agree with, especially if we feel quite strongly about it. And actually, feeling, it's not that we can't then engage with it. It's not just like, oh, I'll just be patient and just let them think what they want. Like, it does involve getting into debate with people, getting into conversation with people. But if we go into those conversations with ill will, it's just, people will smell it a mile off. Like, I'm sure you've had it where people come and talk to you about something they disagree with you, and you can just instantly tell whether they're like, there's ill will there towards you or there's anger. And it's just so hard to then, you're just then suddenly in defense mode, and it's so hard to actually engage. So the more we can engage in those conversations with patience, with love, the more we'll actually be able to have productive conversations with people. And it might be hard. It might be hard to have patience towards people because there'll be some people that will just find, I just can't believe you're doing that. There's a woman I work in a school, and there's one of the other teachers. There's a video that just went viral. Some of you might have seen it. She was walking along. She's a Muslim woman. She was walking along, and this man was just like harassing them so much. He was like shouting abuse at them about all sorts of things. And yeah, obviously that's an example of intolerance. And as people that are coming to a Buddhist centre, I'd probably assume we wouldn't tend towards that extreme intolerance. But I think the working ground for lots of us will be not going into ill will towards people like that as well. So people where we're kind of thinking like, I can't believe you would be that horrible, I can't believe you treat people that way, but then maintaining a level of openness and love for that person despite that. That's going to be where the really challenging ground is for us. And there's no easy like fix to that. It's just, it will take a lot of cultivation of positive emotion, goodwill and understanding, trying to see, I'll talk about it in a bit more in a bit, but trying to understand someone and have a bigger perspective so that we can hold that but still have that love towards them. And then forgiveness. So sometimes, forgiveness is another aspect of Kshanti, of patience. And sometimes people don't just irritate us, they might actually personally attack us, or try and turn other people against us as well. And that can be one of the most painful things to endure, especially if it's people that we've helped or people that we've been kind to. If they turn against us or try and hurt us, that can be really painful. And in these situations, we really need to cultivate Kshanti, and it will manifest as forgiveness. Yeah, so when we're forgiving, we don't, it's not talking about forgetting, but it's not holding grudges, basically, because grudges poison the mind, basically. If we hold grudges, our mind will be poisoned. It will cause us so much suffering, and it will spill out into the world around us. So holding grudges is in no one's interest. And there's a simile that the Buddha talks about, called the Simile of the Saw. So I'm going to quote to you. This is from the Pali Canon, which is some of the earliest Buddhist scriptures. He says, "Monks, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, he among you who let his heart get angered, even at that, would not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected, and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic, with a mind of goodwill, and with no inner hate." Yeah, so that was, if we're being hacked apart by someone with a saw, our minds will remain sympathetic, a mind of goodwill, and with no inner hate. So you can see this is a really high ideal. It's a really sublime ideal to be going towards. I remember hearing about, I won't be able to tell the story exactly, but I remember hearing about a Tibetan monk who was imprisoned when the Chinese occupied Tibet. He was in prison, he was being tortured, I think. And someone interviewed him saying like, "Are you scared of dying?" And he was like, "No, I'm not scared of dying, but I'm scared of losing my metta. I'm scared of losing my goodwill towards my captors, towards my torturers." So that was the thing that he was most scared of, was losing that positive emotion towards the people that were doing all those horrific things to him and those around him. So it's a really sublime ideal, Kshanti. Yeah, so we're not all enlightened, so we'll all need methods for dealing with when people hurt us. And there's a Buddhist teacher called Gampopa, and he gave some instructions on how to work with when other people hit us. So there's a list of 5 things. So I'll just give you these list of 5 things, and then I'll wrap up. So the first one is to include the whole relationship with the person. So if someone's hurt you, if you can expand the whole relationship with them over a period of time, chances are there'll be many kindnesses within that, and many fond memories within that. If they're people that are in our lives, there'll be many kindnesses that we can reflect on to help give a context to it. So if you've got a friend who's like really upset you for some reason, you can also just reflect on the things that they've done for you. That can help put that in the context of the whole relationship. And for people that you don't know, if there's someone that you don't know particularly well, you can reflect on, well, they will have done good things in their life. It's like this isn't the only thing they've ever done. There will be things that they've done that have had a positive effect on people. And the second one is to try to understand the other person. So actions come out of conditions. And the more we can try and understand the conditions, the more we can understand people's actions. And it's kind of a quote. I don't know if it is actually the Buddha that said it, but it's often attributed to the Buddha, that is to understand all is to forgive all. So if we can understand everything, we can forgive everything. And there's often in this tradition, we quite often hear people's life stories. So they would sit around and someone would tell you their life story, and it's really interesting because it makes sense of the person when you hear the things that people have gone through in their lives. It suddenly makes sense of all the things that you know about the person, the good things, but also the things you find challenging. Once you have that perspective of their whole life, it starts to make sense. So the third one is he assumes that when someone's upset you, you'll probably have a passing murderous impulse. So this is to deal with your passing murderous impulses. So reflect that by killing someone, you deny them the possibility of change. So everyone has the possibility of change, but if you kill them, they can't change. But for us, it's probably more that just don't cut people off. Just don't write people off. If you cut people off and you write them off, then that's not going to be able to help them to change. So stay in relation to people. Like obviously there'll be people that actually it's just really unhealthy. It's just really damaging. I need to remove myself. That's fine. It's not saying don't do that. But as much as possible, stay in relation to people. Don't write people off. Don't cut people off. And allow, believe in their ability to change and allow their ability to change. So the fourth one is reflect that other people suffer. So it isn't always obvious when we encounter people that they're suffering, but everyone suffers. And when people are being unpleasant, it's normally because they're in a negative mental state. It's rarely that someone will be in a really positive mental state and they'll do something really horrible to you. It's often because they're in a negative mental state, whether they realise it or not, and then they do something unpleasant. So if you can reflect on the fact that they suffer, we all suffer, and you don't want to add to that suffering as well. And then finally, so this is assuming that you're trying to move towards enlightenment, you're trying to practice Buddhism. But even if you're not, I think it's probably still relevant. So it's to reflect that you're trying to develop metta for all beings. You're trying to develop love, compassion for all beings, even the ones that have harmed you. So it's just kind of going back to basics, like what is my intention? So we're trying to cultivate metta for all beings, and that's going to include this person who's hurt me. Yeah, so that's the five advices from Gampopa on how to deal with when someone's deliberately hurt us. So yeah, so with every small act of patience, we'd move slightly closer to the mind of the Buddha. So returning to those images with the ocean and the cup. With every act of patience, with every act of kindness, we'll slowly be increasing the size of our cup. We'll be getting a bit bigger, so we'll be able to handle more rocks coming into our water. And life will keep on throwing rocks at us. Life's never going to end up throwing rocks into our cup, but the bigger we can be, the less perturbed we'll be by that. And then eventually we can move towards a mind with infinite breadth and infinite depth that will be able to handle anything that life can throw at us. So yeah, I'll leave that there. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.